The stained glass windows of Grace Memorial Chapel cast soft golden light onto rows of mourners dressed in muted black and gray. Thomas Lane's casket, surrounded by pale lilies and crisp white roses, sat beneath the high arched ceiling like a silent sentinel. Martha Lane, his widow of 44 years, clutched the edge of the pew, her fingers trembling. She had spent a lifetime beside this man, raising their son Jason, enduring storms both literal and emotional. And now she sat alone, her heart aching with quiet devastation. Jason had been attentive all morning, gently holding her elbow as he helped her in making sure she drank water, and stood tall when condolences came. His wife, Brianna, moved beside him with the grace of someone born to host rather than grieve. Dressed impeccably in black, with a thin silver scarf knotted just so at her neck, Brianna offered polished smiles and practiced sympathy to every guest. Martha needed air, just a few minutes alone to collect herself. The chapel had a small private room adjacent to the sanctuary, meant for moments like these. Without a word, she slipped away and settled into a chair in the far corner, her back facing the door. The scent of roses lingered on her fingertips. Tears welled quietly in her eyes, and she let them fall, her chest tight with the absence of the man who'd shared her every morning coffee for over 4 decades. The door creaked open behind her. Martha stiffened and leaned slightly to the side, hidden behind a tall arrangement of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus. She recognized the voices instantly. "You need to speed things up with the lawyer," Brianna said, her voice low but firm. "The estate stuff. We need to move fast. I'm getting the old woman into assisted living before the summer." Martha's breath caught. "Old woman." "She's still grieving, Bri," Jason murmured. "Let's at least wait for the will to be read." Brianna sighed, sharp and impatient. Grieving or not, that house is too big for her. 2 stories, outdated everything, and no one to look after her. If she falls or forgets to turn the stove off, then what? We can't put our lives on hold while she plays house in a museum. Jason said nothing. "And look," she continued, "if we don't act now, the market could shift. The value's high. We sell while it's hot, use the money for the kids' college fund, maybe that renovation you've been putting off. It's practical. She's had her life, Jason. It's our turn now." Martha's heart pounded. The weight of grief gave way to a different sensation: betrayal. Not even an hour had passed since Thomas was laid to rest, and already Brianna had moved on to logistics. Her home, her independence, her very worth, all up for quiet negotiation. "Can't we give her a few weeks?" Jason's voice was hesitant, strained. Brianna snorted. "And risk her deciding to stay forever? Come on. Your dad's gone. This is when we make the shift." They exited without noticing her. The door shut with a soft thud. Martha sat motionless, eyes staring at the floor, her breath shallow. The woman who had babysat Kayla and Dylan, who had hosted Thanksgivings and hand-sewn curtains for the nursery, was now reduced to a shift in their plans. She stood slowly, knees stiff, fingers curling into fists. In that moment, the sorrow didn't fade, but it crystallized into clarity. She was not going to let anyone push her out of the life she and Thomas had built brick by brick. This house wasn't just shelter. It was memory, it was love, and it was hers. The war had already begun, and she intended to fight. The following morning, Martha Lane sat at her kitchen table, tracing the rim of her teacup with a trembling finger. The silence of the house was louder now, an echo of all the conversations that would never be had again. Thomas's cardigan still hung by the door. His reading glasses sat untouched on the end table. It hadn't even been a full day since the funeral, and the house already felt hollow, stretched thin by absence. Then came the knock. She wasn't expecting anyone. Martha wiped her eyes and smoothed her sweater before opening the door. "Good morning." Brianna stood there with a bright smile and a large glass baking dish. "I brought chicken pot pie, homemade. Thought you could use a hot meal." Martha hesitated. "That's very thoughtful," she replied, stepping aside. "Come in." Brianna swept into the kitchen as if she owned the place. She set the dish down with flair and immediately began opening cabinets. "Where do you keep the trivets?" she asked without turning around. "Top drawer by the stove," Martha said coolly, watching her. Brianna pulled it open, nodded, and placed the dish down carefully. "You know, I always thought this kitchen had potential," she said, scanning the space. "Great light solid wood cabinets. Just needs a little updating." Martha forced a smile. "It's suited me just fine." Of course, Brianna said quickly. "But you know, when the time comes, a little modern touch would go a long way for resale." Martha blinked. Resale. Brianna froze. Just a moment too long. "Oh, I didn't mean, well, you know, when you decide you want to move on. Downsizing. Something more manageable. Like that lovely place I told Jason about. Silverwood Living." "I'm not looking to move," Martha said, voice firm. "Right," Brianna nodded, flipping on the kettle without asking. "Not now, of course. But it's smart to plan ahead. That's all I'm saying. Places like Silverwood have waiting lists. It's better to be on them than scrambling later." Martha folded her hands in her lap, watching this woman, this person, who had once clinked wine glasses in her backyard, who had hugged her at Christmas and called her mom-in-law. Something was different now. It wasn't just grief clouding her judgment. It was intent, cold, practical, strategic intent. Brianna moved to the spice rack which Thomas had custom-built for Martha years ago, as a surprise anniversary gift. She began rearranging jars. "This oregano's expired," she said with a little chuckle. "You really ought to let me come by sometime and help you reorganize. I've gotten so into decluttering lately. Minimalism. It's the trend now." Martha stood. "I've kept it the way I like it. My husband built that rack for me himself. Every slot has its purpose." Brianna paused. I didn't mean to overstep, but she already had, and she knew it. The tea kettle began to whistle. Brianna poured the water with the same calm confidence of someone setting the stage, then sat across from Martha with a steaming mug between them. "You must feel lost," she said gently. "I can't imagine what you're going through, and I don't want you to feel alone. That's why Jason and I are here to help make decisions, guide you through next steps." "Next steps? I haven't even unpacked the condolence cards yet," Martha said, her voice cool. "And you're talking about next steps?" Brianna's smile flickered. "I just mean there's a lot to think about. The house, the accounts, what your needs will be." "My needs," Martha echoed, keeping her tone level. "My needs are to be left alone for now." There was a long pause, awkward and heavy. "I'm just trying to help," Brianna said finally. Martha met her gaze steady and unblinking. "Help would be asking me what I want, not deciding what to do with my life before the dust on my husband's casket has even settled." The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the ticking wall clock and the gentle bubbling of the pot pie in the oven. Brianna stood abruptly. "I should go. I've got a showing across town." Martha didn't rise. "Thank you for the casserole." At the door, Brianna hesitated, her smile returning but not reaching her eyes. "We'll talk more soon." "Maybe," Martha replied and closed the door gently behind her. As the lock clicked, Martha leaned against the doorframe. The pieces were falling into place now. Brianna's casserole wasn't a gesture, it was a wedge, a foot in the door. And Martha, though still grieving, felt the first embers of anger flicker in her chest. They were coming for her life. She would have to decide if she was ready to fight for it. Later that evening, as the house settled back into its familiar, aching quiet, Martha Lane wandered into Thomas's study. The room remained untouched since his passing, each object a still life of his routines, his leather-bound planner on the desk, his pen resting beside it, the faint scent of cedar, and pipe tobacco lingering in the air. She sat slowly in his chair and ran her hand over the worn armrest. Her fingers brushed the corner of the planner, and she opened it without thinking. Pages filled with his neat handwriting stared back at her appointments, reminders, little notes to himself. Most were mundane, but the final entries made her pause. 3 meetings with AG. She recognized the initials, Arthur Goldstein, their attorney for over 2 decades. The first meeting had been nearly 4 months ago, the second a few weeks later, and the last 10 days before Thomas passed. Each one marked in bold ink with the word "finalize" underlined. Martha's heart picked up pace. She leaned back, eyes drifting to the ceiling, as Thomas's words returned to her with sudden clarity. He'd said it one night when the pain had flared, and she was tucking the quilt tighter around him. "I've protected you," he'd whispered, voice thin but certain, "even if I'm not around." At the time, she'd thought it was just comfort. Now, it felt like a message deliberate and weighty. She reached for the phone and dialed Dr. Walters, their longtime physician and friend. The line rang twice. Dr. Walters came the familiar warm baritone. "This is Dr. Greg Walters. Greg, it's Martha." A pause. "Martha, how are you holding up?" "Still breathing," she said with a tight smile. "But I need to ask you something. It's about Thomas." "Of course. Anything." "In his last weeks, did he ever talk to you about me? About what might happen after?" There was a pause, brief but telling. Yes, he did." "What did he say?" "He was concerned," Dr. Walters said gently. "He knew how strong you are, but he also knew that grief makes people vulnerable. He was worried there might be pressure for you to leave your home before it was necessary. He asked me to evaluate your health carefully so no one could question your ability to live independently." Martha closed her eyes. "Did you?" "I did. And I found no medical reason that would prevent you from staying where you are. Physically, cognitively, you're as sharp as ever. He asked me to put it in writing. You did, yes. I wrote a formal letter on file. He wanted it available just in case." A rush of emotion flooded her. Gratitude, sorrow, fierce admiration. "Would you be willing to send me a copy? I already have it addressed and ready," Dr. Walters said. "He made me promise. I can drop it off tomorrow or send it by courier, whatever you need." "Drop it off," Martha said, her voice steadier now. "And thank you for everything." They ended the call and she sat still for a long moment. Thomas had known. Somehow, he had seen what might happen. He hadn't just worried, he'd acted. She rose and walked to the bookshelf beside the desk. Tucked in the top shelf was their family folder, a place they kept all important documents. Marriage license, birth certificates, insurance. She pulled it down and opened it on the table. Inside, neatly clipped together, was an envelope from Goldstein and Associates. The corner bore today's date. With trembling hands, she opened it. The letter was straightforward, a copy of Thomas Lane's amended will. She skimmed quickly, searching for what mattered most, and found it. "The residence at 415 Maplewood Drive shall remain the sole property of Martha Lane, with unconditional right to reside therein for the duration of her life. In the event that Martha Lane is pressured, coerced, or removed from the residence without her voluntary consent, or without the documented recommendation of at least 2 licensed physicians confirming medical necessity, the property shall not pass to her heirs. Instead, it shall be donated in full to the Children's Literacy Fund." Martha exhaled, the tension in her chest uncoiling. Thomas had anticipated everything, even Brianna's ambition, even Jason's silence. He'd protected her the only way he could from beyond the grave, with law, with foresight, with love. And now she had to make sure that protection counted. As she folded the documents and returned them to the folder, Martha felt the first flicker of control return to her chest. Her life, her home were no longer a bargaining chip. She was not just someone's widow. She was Thomas Lane's wife. And now, she was ready. The next morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong, deceptively peaceful for what Martha Lane knew was coming. She'd barely taken her second sip of tea when she saw the silver SUV pull into the driveway. It was early, too early for a casual visit. And sure enough, out stepped Jason and Brianna, both dressed in smart casuals that screamed, "We mean business." Martha stood at the kitchen sink, watching through the lace curtains. As Brianna adjusted her blouse in the car window reflection, and Jason retrieved a folder from the back seat. Her pulse remained steady. She was ready. When the doorbell rang, she opened it with a calm smile. "Good morning. Come in." Jason stepped forward, hugging her with a familiar warmth that Martha appreciated more than she could say. Brianna followed, holding a bright brochure in her manicured hand. "We didn't mean to surprise you, Mom," Jason said, settling into the same armchair his father had favored. "We just thought we could have a quick chat about plans." "Of course," Martha said evenly. "I've been thinking about plans too." Brianna's eyes lit up with practiced enthusiasm. "Perfect, because we brought some great options. This place is called Willow Springs. It's less than 15 minutes from here. They have apartments with walk-in tubs, on-site staff activities. It's like a cruise ship that never leaves land." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Sounds festive." Jason chuckled nervously. "It's not about rushing you. We just want what's best. A place that's safe, where you're not alone." "I see," Martha replied, walking to the kitchen. "Let me grab something before we continue." As she opened the side door to the hallway, Nurse Lila stepped in. Mid-50s, sharp-eyed, no-nonsense, she wore a cardigan and slacks, but her presence carried quiet authority. "Sorry I'm late," Lila said with a smirk. Traffic on Maple backed up. Martha turned to her stunned visitors. "I asked Lila to join us. She was with Thomas in his final weeks, and she's helped me evaluate some home care options." Brianna's jaw tightened. "You brought a nurse to a family discussion," Martha smiled. "Sandra is practically family after everything she did for Thomas, and her experience might be helpful here." Jason looked uneasy. "Mom." "Let's continue," Martha said, placing a neatly folded document on the coffee table. "Dr. Walters provided this. It's a formal assessment of my health, physical and cognitive. He sees no reason I can't continue living independently." Jason reached for the letter and scanned it, his brows furrowing. "It says you're in excellent health for your age." Brianna gave a short laugh. "That's great, but health isn't everything. This house is 2 stories. Yes," Martha cut in. "With a functioning chairlift Thomas installed last year. I've already spoken with a contractor about adding grab bars in the bathroom, improving lighting, and moving the laundry to the main floor. Nurse Lila helped me build a full aging-in-place plan." Brianna started, but Martha held up a hand. "I'm not moving. Not now. Not because it's convenient, not because someone else thinks I'm old enough to be pushed aside. This is my home, and it will remain so until I say otherwise." Jason cleared his throat. "Mom, we didn't mean to—" "Jason," Martha said gently, "you stood in this very room and said you'd support whatever made me comfortable. Does that promise still stand?" Jason looked down, then nodded slowly. "Yes, it does." Brianna's smile had vanished. She glanced at the unopened brochures on the table, then back at Lila. "This feels like a setup," she muttered. "It's a conversation," Martha replied. "One we're finally having honestly." Lila crossed her arms. "And one that clearly needed a third party. I saw how things were during Thomas's illness. I'm not just here for moral support, I'm here because I saw the cracks before they widened." Silence fell. Brianna's expression wavered, caught between indignation and disbelief. Then the front door swung open. Grandma Kayla's voice rang out, her school bag slung over one shoulder. "In here, sweetheart," Martha called. Kayla stepped in, paused when she saw the room, then gave her mother a narrowed look. "What's going on? Family chat?" Brianna said, tight-lipped. Kayla's gaze shifted to her grandmother. "Do you need backup?" Martha smiled. "Already have it." Lila chuckled. "You're late to the battlefield, kiddo." Martha took a breath. "Let's be clear, I've made arrangements to ensure my safety and comfort. I will not be leaving my home unless I decide the time is right. And any effort to force otherwise will backfire." Jason nodded solemnly. Brianna said nothing. The tide had turned. 3 days later, the house was quiet again. Martha had spent the morning tending to her garden beds, clipping dead blooms from the roses, and laying fresh mulch in the shaded areas Thomas used to weed with pride. It gave her a sense of normalcy, grounding her through the chaos brewing just beneath the surface. Kayla arrived after school, as she often did lately, her backpack slung low, earbuds dangling around her neck. She kissed Martha on the cheek and headed straight for the kitchen, grabbing a soda and flopping onto the couch without a word. Her energy was different today, tense, almost buzzing. "You okay, sweetheart?" Martha asked, settling into her recliner. Kayla chewed her lip. "I need to tell you something. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did." Martha's heart skipped. "What is it?" "I was in the hallway at home, coming back from the garage," Kayla said. "Mom didn't know I was there. She was on the phone with someone named Valerie." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Valerie Realtor, Valerie Hill. I looked her up." Martha's hands tightened around the armrest. Kayla's voice dropped full of fury. She told her the house would be ready to list by June, that you'd be moved into Silverwood by then. She said, and I quote, "The old girl won't know what hit her." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Martha felt a chill spread from the base of her neck to her fingertips. It wasn't just scheming anymore. It was action. A plan set in motion behind her back. Her own daughter-in-law was orchestrating a hostile takeover of the life she still held dear. "Kayla," she began, but the girl cut her off. "I couldn't believe it. I wanted to barge in right then, but I waited. I needed to talk to you first. Do you want me to say something?" Martha shook her head slowly. "No, honey. But I want you to stay close. Things are about to come to a head." The next evening, Jason and Brianna arrived for dinner. Martha had invited them after confirming they were free. She made baked chicken green beans with almonds and mashed potatoes, one of Jason's favorites growing up. They sat around the table, tension palpable, but masked by polite conversation. Martha waited until dessert, when Kayla reappeared with a bowl of fresh strawberries and whipped cream. "Perfect timing," Martha said with a tight smile. "We were just getting to the part where we talk business." Brianna froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Business?" Martha turned to her son. "Jason, did you know your wife contacted a realtor?" Jason blinked. What Martha's eyes didn't leave Brianna. A woman named Valerie Hill. Brianna's composure slipped. "That was just an inquiry, nothing official. She said I'd be moved out by June," Martha continued, "that the house would be ready for listing. And she said, Kayla, would you mind?" Kayla, standing with her arms crossed, recited flatly, "The old girl won't know what hit her." Jason turned pale. "You said that I didn't?" "Not exactly like that," Brianna stammered. "It was taken out of context." "Context?" Jason asked, his voice rising. "You're making backdoor deals to sell my mother's house." Martha stood slow and deliberate. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Brianna. I know everything. About the call, about Silverwood, about your timeline. And I also know Thomas left protections in place that make your plan impossible." Jason looked from his mother to his wife. "What protections?" Martha retrieved the folder from the side table. She laid the amended will on the table, pointing to the clause Thomas had added. "If I'm pressured or removed from this house without medical cause, the home doesn't go to you. It goes to charity. To the Children's Literacy Fund in Thomas's name." Jason sank back in his chair, stunned. Brianna's face was crimson. "So now you're using guilt, your husband's death, as a weapon?" "No," Martha said quietly. "I'm using my voice. The one I let stay quiet for too long." Kayla slid into the seat beside her grandmother. "You tried to lie. You tried to hide it, but I heard you, Mom. And so did Grandma. You crossed a line." "I did what I thought was best," Brianna snapped. "No," Martha said, her tone sharp and clear. "You did what was best for you. Not for Jason. Not for Kayla. And certainly not for me." Jason stood up. "We'll talk about this later, Brianna." "No," Martha said firmly. "We'll talk about it now, because I'm not going anywhere, and the more you push, the harder I'll push back. Brianna stood glaring. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Martha said, but at least it's mine to make. The room fell silent. Kayla reached for Martha's hand. The war wasn't over, but the battle tonight had been won. The waiting room at Goldstein and Associates was just as Martha remembered it: soft carpet, oak-paneled walls, and the faint scent of leather and lemon polish. A place built for quiet, expensive decisions. She sat upright in a burgundy chair, her hands folded over her purse. Jason and Brianna sat across from her, not speaking. Jason fidgeted with his tie. Brianna stared at her watch. Mr. Arthur Goldstein, silver-haired and deliberate in every motion, stepped into the doorway. Mrs. Lane, Jason, Brianna. Thank you for coming. Please follow me. They entered a formal conference room where a long table gleamed under pendant lights. Mr. Goldstein gestured for them to sit and took his place at the head. First, he began, his voice warm but professional. I want to offer my condolences again. Thomas was a longtime client and a dear friend. Thank you, Martha said quietly. Now let's review the last will and testament of Thomas Lane, updated 3 months before his passing. He opened a thick folder, placed reading glasses on his nose, and began. To his wife Martha Lane, he bequeaths full and sole ownership of their home at 415 Maplewood Drive, including all personal effects and household contents therein. Additionally, all shared financial accounts remain in her name, as well as the primary life insurance policy and pension benefits. Jason nodded slowly. Brianna tapped her heel under the table. There is, however, a specific clause attached to the property. Mr. Goldstein continued, looking directly at Martha. Thomas added this himself very clearly, and with notarized intent. He stated that Martha Lane has the unconditional right to reside in the home for the remainder of her life. Brianna's brow furrowed. Unconditional. Goldstein turned the page. It means her right to stay is absolute unless and only unless 2 independent medical professionals provide written documentation that she is medically unfit to live there alone. Jason glanced at his wife, confused. Goldstein continued. Should Martha be pressured, coerced, or removed from the home against her will, the inheritance plan changes. He looked at Jason. In that case, the property will not pass to you, Mr. Lane. It will instead be liquidated, and the full proceeds donated to the Alzheimer's Hope Foundation in honor of Thomas's late mother. The room went silent. Brianna sat frozen, then slowly leaned forward, her voice sharp. He left his home to a charity if Martha is forced to move. Correct, Goldstein said without emotion. That's absurd, she snapped. You mean to tell me, one conversation, one disagreement, and the house is gone from the family forever? It would require evidence of coercion, Goldstein said, unfazed. But yes, if the condition is triggered, the inheritance path is redirected. Jason's voice came low and stunned. I didn't know. He never told me. Goldstein raised an eyebrow. Thomas wanted it that way. He feared you might be influenced. Martha watched as the words landed. Jason slumped back in his chair, the color draining from his face. Brianna turned to him. You're not going to let this stand, are you? She hissed. It's his will, Bri, Jason said, rubbing his temple. There has to be a way to contest it, she insisted. You can try, Goldstein replied calmly. But I should inform you that Thomas underwent a full cognitive evaluation at the time these changes were made. He was of sound mind. The signing session was also recorded, as is our firm's policy for major amendments. Martha sat silent, her face unreadable. This isn't right, Brianna said, her voice rising. He just cut us out of what's fair, of what's owed. Goldstein looked at her over his glasses. What's fair, Mrs. Lane, is what the deceased decided. What's owed is what he arranged in full legal clarity. Jason shook his head more to himself than anyone else. He really thought this through. Yes, Martha said softly. He did. Goldstein reached into the folder and pulled out 3 envelopes. Thomas left personal letters, one for each of you, He passed them out and Martha accepted hers with a trembling hand, her name written in Thomas's unmistakable scrawl. Brianna didn't reach for hers. "I'm guessing there's nothing for me. There isn't Goldstein confirmed." Brianna stood abruptly. "We're done here." Jason followed, moving slowly. As they left, he turned to Martha, eyes apologetic. "I didn't know he'd—" "I believe you," Martha said gently. Outside, the door clicked shut behind them. Martha stared at her letter for a long moment, then slipped it into her purse. Not yet. Today, Thomas had spoken for her one last time, and he'd said everything she needed the world to hear. The air inside the Lane house was thick with unease as the front door clicked shut behind Brianna. She walked in ahead of Jason, heels sharp against the hardwood floor, her shoulders stiff with restrained fury. Martha stood in the kitchen, calmly slicing apples for a pie she hadn't even planned to bake. She needed the rhythm, the normalcy, something to keep her hands busy, while her resolve held fast. "You ambushed us," Brianna said without preamble. Martha didn't look up. "No, I protected myself." "That clause was designed to punish us," Brianna snapped. "To embarrass me." Martha set the knife down with care. "Brianna, if you feel embarrassed, that's your conscience speaking. I didn't write the clause. Thomas did. And he did it for a reason." Jason hovered near the dining room table, silent, watching, processing. "You've twisted everything," Brianna continued. "You're acting like I'm the villain for trying to make sure you're cared for." "No," Martha said, turning to face her fully. "You're the villain for trying to make decisions for me. For calling a realtor before even discussing it. For using my age as justification to steal my home." Brianna's jaw tightened. That house was meant to be passed down. "You're denying your family." "No," Martha interrupted, her voice low but steel sharp. "What I'm doing is setting a boundary. One that should have never needed to be drawn. I'm not a fragile old woman waiting for instructions. I'm capable. And I'm not leaving." Jason finally spoke. "You lied to me." Brianna turned, startled. "What?" "You said you were just exploring, that you hadn't spoken to anyone yet. But you had. You planned to list the house. You even picked a move-out date." "I didn't want to worry you," she replied, voice cooler now. "I was handling it." "Behind my back," Jason said. "Behind her back." Brianna's eyes narrowed. "Don't turn this around on me." "I did what any responsible adult would do." "No, you didn't." A new voice cut in. Kayla entered from the hallway, her arms crossed and eyes blazing. She'd been listening from the stairs. "You acted like Grandma was furniture, like she didn't matter. But she's the most capable person I know. And if you can't see that, maybe you shouldn't be making decisions for anyone." "Kayla," Brianna warned, "this is not your place." "Actually," Kayla said, stepping beside Martha, "it is. Because I have a proposal." Martha blinked. "A proposal?" "I start college at State in the fall," Kayla said. "It's a 20-minute drive. I could live here with you." Brianna gasped. "Excuse me, I'd help around the house," Kayla continued. "Be here in the evenings. You'd have company and nobody could say you're living alone." Martha was stunned, heart swelling at her granddaughter's courage. "That's a generous offer, honey. But your first year will still be my own," Kayla said. "I'll have campus life. I just won't be wasting money on a dorm I don't need. And I get to live with my favorite person." Jason's eyes softened, his voice caught. "You'd really do that?" Kayla nodded. "Absolutely." Brianna's face flushed deep crimson. "This is ridiculous. You're encouraging her to throw away the college experience." "No," Jason said slowly. "She's choosing a different one, and she's helping her grandmother. You know, the woman whose life you tried to rearrange like a spreadsheet." "This is emotional manipulation," Brianna muttered. "No," Martha said softly, stepping forward. "This is family." Silence stretched, heavy and awkward. Jason turned to Martha. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stood up sooner." I see it now, how much you were being pushed. Martha reached out and touched his arm. It's not too late to do the right thing. Brianna opened her mouth, then shut it again. Her eyes darted between them, between Kayla's resolve and Jason's remorse. She was losing this battle, and she knew it. We're going, she said abruptly. Jason, I'll meet you in the car. Without waiting, she turned on her heel and strode out, heels echoing down the hallway. Jason exhaled. I need to fix this. You just started to, Martha said, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. Kayla smiled. I'll bring my dorm stuff here when I move in. Hope you like poster walls and midnight ramen. Martha laughed a full, warm laugh that filled the room with something it hadn't held in weeks' hope. The tide had turned. The house on Maplewood Drive breathed differently now. Lighter, brighter, as the summer gave way to fall and then to the fresh, crisp air of early winter. Martha Lane stood at her kitchen window one morning, watching the last golden leaves drift lazily from the maple trees she and Thomas had planted when Jason was still a boy. Time had moved forward not as a rush, but in gentle steps. The kind you feel more than you see. The home modifications were completed within 6 weeks after the will reading. A local contractor had installed grab bars in the bathrooms, better lighting in the hallways, and a stair lift that moved with a soft whir between the first and second floors. The laundry room had been converted into a cozy little corner on the main level, no more navigating steep stairs with a basket of wet clothes. It all looked seamless. Not like a house preparing for decline, but a house that had simply evolved, just like its owner. And now, Kayla's laughter echoed through the halls, like sunlight bouncing off water. She'd moved in just before classes started at State University. Her room upstairs was a whirl of books, throw blankets, and twinkle lights strung along the wall. Most nights she cooked with Martha, experimenting with recipes she found on TikTok, and they'd sit at the table talking about everything from politics to pasta sauce. You're a better roommate than I expected, Kayla said one night, sipping chamomile tea with her legs curled beneath her on the couch. And you're less messy than I feared, Martha replied dryly, earning a grin. Despite the late-night study sessions and microwave disasters, the house felt young again. Alive. Jason had started visiting alone. At first, his shoulders were heavy with guilt, his words halting. But Martha never chastised him. She let him come when he wanted, let the silences speak when he couldn't. And slowly, they rebuilt something, an honest, tentative kind of closeness they hadn't shared in years. He brought over flowers for the front porch, fixed a few loose shutters, and once even installed a new storm door without being asked. I should have said something sooner, he admitted one afternoon, sipping coffee at the patio table. I saw what Brianna was doing. I just didn't know how to stop it. You've said it now, Martha replied. That's enough. Brianna, for her part, had retreated. She still hovered in the background, disapproving and distant. But the dynamic had shifted. Jason no longer let her speak for both of them, and she, perhaps sensing that her influence had waned, busied herself with work and social circles that rarely included Martha. Martha didn't miss the tension. Her life was full of small, affirming victories. She joined a water aerobics class at the community center and quickly became a favorite among the instructors for her dry wit and enviable endurance. She volunteered twice a week at the public library, helping adult learners improve their reading skills, something she hadn't done in decades, but fell into like a familiar rhythm. She even reconnected with an old friend, Eleanor, whom she hadn't seen since their teaching days. They met once a month for brunch, trading stories and laughter over spinach quiche and hot coffee. But the heart of her new life was Kayla. On the 1-year anniversary of Thomas's passing, Martha woke before dawn. She drove herself to the cemetery, clutching a small bouquet of marigolds, his favorite. She knelt before the headstone, tracing his name with her fingertips. I miss you every day, she whispered. But you were right. I didn't break. I bent, but I didn't break. The wind whispered through the trees as if he were answering her. That evening, she and Kayla sat on the back patio, a blanket draped across their laps as fireflies blinked around them. The garden was dormant now, but the stone path still shimmered in the moonlight. Kayla reached for her grandmother's hand. "I'm glad I moved in. So am I," Martha said, her voice warm. "You ever think about moving, like down the road?" "Maybe someday," Martha said. "But not because I'm told to, because I decide it's time." Kayla nodded. "Good. Because this place, it still feels like home." They sat in silence, broken only by the hum of crickets and the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog. The fireflies danced between them like little stars made real. Martha leaned back, her eyes on the sky. She wasn't the same woman who sat crying in a corner room at Grace Memorial a year ago. She was stronger now, clearer, unyielding in the best way. Her life hadn't ended when Thomas's did. It had quietly, defiantly begun again.